And welcome to Talking True Cases. I'm Mark Williams-Thomas, and on today's podcast, I'll be talking to Michael O'Brien, who became known to many as the Cardiff Newsagent Three, wrongly convicted of the murder and spent 11 years in jail. Michael joins me not just to talk in relation to that case, but actually in more detail about three other cases: the Merthyr Three, Joe Fetter, and the case of Luke Mitchell, which is quite a fascinating case. And in fact, lots of people have asked me to see if we will cover that case. But before I do that, I want to bring you two cases which have made the news this week and are very disturbing. Let's first of all deal with serial killer Robert Maudsley. He spent 23 hours a day in jail in his cell at Wakefield Prison, which is effectively a glass box. He was jailed for murdering child molester John Farrell in 1974. The decision by the authorities is that he will stay in that glass box in Wakefield jail until he dies. He's deemed so dangerous that he's no longer allowed to associate with other prisoners or even the guards. He's in a bulletproof glass box at Wakefield jail because since his arrest and conviction for the murder, he has killed 3 more people inside jail. He's referred to as Hannibal the Cannibal. And let's look at that. That's based on Dr. Hannibal Lecter, who is a created character by the American novelist Thomas Harris, who basically set out that Hannibal Lecter ate his victims. And it's based on the killer, Alfredo Bali Trevino. Trevino was known as the Walkman of Nueva Leon, a former physician, a doctor, who was convicted for the murder and mutilation of his lover. He was convicted in relation to that. Although he's considered to be a serial killer, he hasn't actually been convicted of other offences, but he is believed to have killed other hitchhikers in the late 1950s and 1960s. But here's an incredible twist. The man goes to jail. He's released in 1980 after 20 years in jail. And guess what? He goes back to practicing as a doctor. He finally died of cancer in 2009, aged 81. But back to Maudsley. Maudsley's life was disturbed. He grew up in an orphanage, and age 8, he was taken to his home by his parents and suffered years of abuse. Age 16, he left home and became hooked on drugs. He then was forced into selling his body for sex and became known as what is a rent boy. In fact, one of his victims was John Farrell, the person that he subsequently went to jail for. And that was reason because Farrell showed him pictures of him abusing a boy. So Maudsley will remain in jail at Wakefield Prison for the rest of his life. The next case I want to talk about is a very sad one, and it relates to vulnerable Amber Gibson, killed by her brother Connor. She had a life of misery and sadness, brought up in foster care, and was living in a children's home at the time of her murder. Amber was reported missing on the evening of Friday, November the 26th, and her body was discovered in Woodland in Scotland on the morning of November the 28th. Connor had killed his sister Amber, removed her clothes, sexually assaulted her, beaten her with a blunt force instrument before he finally strangled her, killing her. Her cause of death by the pathologist was determined to be compression of the neck. This is a CCTV of him walking home after having killed her. And you can see he walks across the road, stops for a very short period of time, and then continues on his walk back to where he was staying. And that is a homeless hostel. That's where he'd been living. And you can now see this CCTV footage the moment he takes that bag containing blood-soaked clothing to an area where he dumped it. He then returns back to the hostel with an empty bin. In the early hours after the murder, Connor wrote to a Snapchat group of friends, "I'm really going to need your guys' help with something when yours come back. I'm being serious." And on the day before his arrest, Connor posted on Facebook the following message: "Amber, you will fly high for the rest of time. We all miss you, especially me. I love You Ginger Midget, GBHF, which stands for Goodbye for Now. And he signs off 2 kisses. During the 13-day trial, Connor Gibson remained unemotional in the box, denied the charges, but was found guilty and now faces a mandatory life sentence when he will be sentenced in due course. And a further shocking humiliation to Amber is that Stephen Corrigan, another man, was found guilty of attempting to defeat the ends of justice by intimately touching and concealing Amber's body after discovering her, instead of contacting the emergency services. Corrigan has said that he was not at the location, denies the offence completely, but is at a loss to explain why 39 areas of Amber's body had his DNA on, including Amber's breasts, buttocks, and thighs. And they also say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Whilst Connor Gibson awaited trial for murder of his sister Amber, his dad, Peter Gibson, was jailed for 10 years for 10 separate offences, including the rape of a 62-year-old woman in Scotland, in which he tied her up, blindfolded her, and abused her, and also the sexual assault of a young boy. And we learned during the trial of Connor Gibson that Amber had been raped by another man, Jamie Starr, in 2021. And like Connor Gibson, Starr will be sentenced in due course. Our thoughts are with Amber Gibson's family at this terrible time. And I want to move to the 3 cases we're going to talk about today: the Merthyr 3, Joe Fatter, and the case of Luke Mitchell. Let me start with the Merthyr 3. In 1995, an arser attack in Merthyr Tydfil killed Diana Jones and her 2 baby daughters. 3 women, Donna Clark, Annette Hewins, and Denise Sullivan, were accused of one of the most notorious crimes in Welsh criminal history, but later cleared. The case remains unsolved, with a real killer or killers at large. The police stand accused of allowing the killer or killers to go free because they pursued the wrong lines of inquiry, they say, based on rumour and gossip. Michael's here to take up the story for me in relation to this case, which has dominated Welsh history and in particular the town of Merthyr Tydfil. Michael, it's great to have you on board again. You've been campaigning. At the end, actually, we're going to hear about a major development of a case today. But before that, let's talk about these 3 separate cases. Talk to me about the Merthyr 3.
Well, I actually know the Merthyr 3 quite well. When I came out of prison, they were still inside, and I got to write to Annette Hewins to do with the case, and she was insistent that all 3 hadn't done it. So when I came out, I teamed up with a number of journalists to have a look at the case, and we were all convinced that it was impossible for them to have committed this crime. Now, and sadly, Annette Hewins has passed away. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, because she hadn't recovered from what has happened. And there's only Denise didn't get her name cleared as such. She got cleared of the fire, but they said that she lied in a statement to give Donna Clark, the other co-accused, a alibi for the actual arson attack. And I've got some new evidence, and I'm writing a book on the Merthyr 3 as we speak, where I can prove categorically that they couldn't have done it. And it all hinges on what kind of petrol was used to start the fire. Now, this evidence was available at the time of the trial by one expert, but the defence didn't seem to pick up on this. And I've got another expert who we've seen, and he is adamant the petrol which started the fire was unleaded. Now, according to the police, Annette Hewins was seen at the petrol station putting petrol into a car, and that was the petrol which started the fire. That's what they got it from. But the fact was, it was unleaded she put into her car. So if the petrol is not the same, where did Donna Clark get the petrol from? Because she only had a 15-minute window to commit this crime. And we've done the route. We've had a look at all the logistics and geographic places where she would have had to have go to, and she would have had to have been an Olympic runner to have committed that crime in the time allowed.
So, Michael, your evidence the evidence you've now got is that she filled up with unleaded fuel, but it was leaded fuel that caused the fire. Is that the argument?
That is correct. Yes, I've spoken to I've spoken to a number of experts on this particular case, but this was come in a private meeting with South Wales Police, where Annette Hewins, one of the defendants, and a journalist approached South Wales Police with one of their own experts, and he admitted and conceded it could not have been the three girls because the petrol was different, and there was no possible way that they could get that petrol in the time allowed in that 15-minute framework, change their clothes, and go back to where they were. It's just impossible to do. But
Michael, let me take you back to
Yeah.
the initial. Let's just set the scene. So 1995, why Diana Jones is at home with her two daughters. What happens?
Well, it was horrific. I mean, I want to say this: we mustn't forget about the victim's family in this case, and I haven't. I mean, we must bear them in mind. It was a horrific fire, which was petrol was poured through the door, or it wasn't the letterbox; it was through the door because it was a makeshift door there. Because I don't know, I can't explain why that was at the time, but petrol was poured through the door, and the whole house caught on fire. They were seen in the window trying to get out. Somebody recognized that there was something wrong and tried to help, but the flames were so high, and it just exploded like no tomorrow. They didn't have a chance, and it was a horrendous crime. There's no doubt about that.
Horrific. And what led the police to start to focus on Donna Clark, Annette Hewins, and Denise Sullivan?
Well, Donna Clark had an affair with Sean Hibbard, Hibbard's girlfriend, who happened to be the victim of the arson attack. So therefore, they put it down to a jealous relationship, and that's the reason why they picked on Donna Clark. But Donna Clark was with Annette Hewins that night and Denise Sullivan. So if they were saying that Donna Clark was involved, they would have to have put the other two in as well. So it was
Right.
like a joint enterprise sort of thing.
So yeah, Donna was having an affair with Diana Jones's partner.
That's what was alleged. But what I found out, and my researchers found out, she did have an affair with him, but that was in the February. That was in a few months before, and it was finished. But the media picked up on it, like to say, well, there's the motive. There's the motive to start the fire. And it's untrue. It was wrong to do that. And obviously, people picked on the fact that there was a motive because she had an affair with Donna Hibbard, not Donna Hibbard, sorry, I beg your pardon, with Shauna Hibbard, Clark. And therefore there was a problem. I can understand Clark,
Donna Clark, Annette Hewins, and Denise Sullivan are accused by the police because they believe that Donna Clark had a motive, which was she was in a relationship with Diana Jones's partner. What happens to the three of them in terms of action against them?
What action? Well, they were taken into the police station, voluntary, first of all. They only pulled in Donna Clark and Denise Sullivan. And what they did, the police then, they're very crafty. This is a loophole here. They pulled her in as a witness, first of all, and then took the statements from her, held her in the police station for a few days, but they said it was voluntary. But we all know that if she didn't go with the police, they would have arrested her. So it wasn't as voluntary as what, it is. And this is the thing with the PACE Act. When she got arrested, she didn't have when she was a witness, she didn't have the safeguards, like when you get arrested, like of PACE. And there is a bit of a loophole there. So they use what she said as a witness against her. Now, bearing in mind, these girls were heavily involved in, smoking drugs and everything. You know what I mean? They're no angels. They'll tell you this themselves, but they're no murderers. There's a difference. And
so they're interviewed by the police. Do they get charged?
Yes, they did get charged. I can't remember exactly, the time difference, but I know Annette Hewins got charged at a later date because she was campaigning for Denise, who was a relative of hers. So therefore, and Donna Clark. And then that's how she got brought into it because she was causing a big fuss. So they charged them they all went to Crown Court, Merthyr Crown Court. Annette got found guilty and got 13 years. Donna Clark got 20 years. And Denise was acquitted of the actual crime, but found guilty of perverting the cause of justice by giving Donna Clark an alibi, when in fact she was telling the truth. She didn't give her a false alibi, but that's how she got found guilty. And that's what the case was. It went to the Court of Appeal about a year later. Annette Hewins was totally cleared. Donna Clark's case was left on file. She was actually sent for a retrial. And because of the double jeopardy rule, they successfully argued, a legal team, that she shouldn't be tried twice for the same offence. And the judge agreed, and the case was thrown out, but it was left on file. With Denise, she was told she couldn't appeal against the perverting the cause of justice, for the simple fact was there was no evidence to appeal. For as they were concerned, she got acquitted of the actual murder, but perverting the cause of justice, they say that there was no grounds to appeal. So what she did, she appealed against the sentence of 4 years that she got, and got 6 months taken off at the Court of Appeal. But then the evidence I mentioned at the beginning, Denise's lawyers didn't know about this other forensic guy I've recently got on board, which corroborates the one at the trial. So now we're trying to get a new appeal. And because you haven't had an appeal against conviction, you don't have to go to the CCRC. You can go to the Criminal Appeals Act 1968, which is what we're trying to do. And there's a group in London called Appeal, a charity, who are looking at the case as we speak and getting all the documents together. I mean, there was a 16-year-old witness as well in this particular case who gave evidence against Denise and the other girls. And she was a very, very vulnerable young lady. She had a young child, and they told her if she didn't give evidence against them, they would put a child in care. And all this has come out at the trial, and some of it's come out recently. And when you put the whole picture together, the case was based on innuendos, if, buts, and maybes, and all hinged on the fact that Donna Clark had an affair with a boyfriend.
And Donna Clark is where now? What's happening with Donna Clark now?
Donna Clark's not in a very good place. We're trying to get her on board to, because we feel that she needs to appeal against the leaving it on file, because that leaves a nasty, horrible taste in the mouth when you know she's innocent. But she's so fragile.
Is still in jail? She was released from jail?
No, she's free. She got released, but she's in a bad way. I mean, the last I heard, she was still on the drugs. She's still finding it tough. It's really difficult for her to get her head together. And we're worried about her. We're really worried about her mental health.
I suppose the strangest thing I find is if they find Donna Clark and Annette Hewins innocent of the murder, then it therefore follows that Denise Sullivan could be telling the truth, and therefore they can appeal in relation to the perverting the course of justice, which was about lying that Donna and Annette were with her. That seems to be the logical step, isn't it?
That's exactly what we're doing. That's right. And what we're doing is we're speaking to this expert who said about the petrol argument, and we're hoping we can use the expert report to clear Denise, and it'll clear Donna at the same time. Because if we can get the perjury charge overturned, that would mean they accept that Donna Clark didn't do the crime. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really, here. But there's no doubt about it. I've got to know Denise quite well. She's really doing well for herself. Don't get me wrong. When she first got acquitted, she went down some serious, sad roads. The roads I've been taking drugs, not coping, selling drugs, going to prison, coming out, because she couldn't cope with what happened. And I don't think we should judge her too harshly at all, because people do react to things in strange ways. But she's got herself together now. She's been, and I've told her about all the stuff I found. We done a podcast, funnily enough, back about 6 months ago, and it's the first time she's ever spoken publicly about what happened to her. And she's really coming out of her shell now. And, I think we will get her name cleared, but it's going to take some time. There's still a bit of investigating still to go on. But I'm pleased to say that we have got some new evidence, and I think it's significant.
Good. We'll keep going with that. The sad situation with, of course, all of this, and you're doing a great job because people shouldn't go to jail if they're innocent, is what about Diana Jones and her two daughters? The killer or killers still remain at large?
Absolutely, and that's what we're focusing on as well. I mean, Denise has said this from the very beginning, and so did Annette before she died and passed away. They want justice for Diana Jones's family.
Any idea who the real
Yes,
killers
there
are?
is a number one suspect there, which has been brought to the attention of the police. Yes, at the Court of Appeal, they mentioned that. I don't want to mention him because
No.
it might impede further investigations.
But there is a
But
named
yes,
individual
there is
are
a
they
named individual, yes, in the documents of the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal said, why haven't this man been investigated? Until this day, South Wales Police still have not investigated him, and yet he's more of a number one suspect than what the other three should have ever been.
And still alive and in Merthyr or in
yes,
South
he's still
Wales?
alive, still in Merthyr, and it's well known within certain circles who this person is. I'm going to name him in my book, make no mistake about that. I think I've got enough evidence to prove that he's got some serious questions to answer. I think I will do that, and hopefully the case will be reopened. I think what people got to remember when you're doing with miscarriages of justice, there's two sides to the coin here, as you pointed out. There's the primary victims, which is the ones who died. You know what I mean? We mustn't forget them. They're the victims in all this and their families. And then you've got the secondary victims, which is Denise, Annette, and Donna. And justice has got to be fair to both sides, and we've got to get the right person behind bars. And I feel strongly, just as much as I want to clear Denise's name, I want to get the real killer for the victims' families. Oh, yes.
Has the real killer ever been arrested by the police?
I'm not sure he's even been interviewed properly. From what I can gather, at the trial, they tried to use him as a witness. And then for some unknown reason, they didn't call him. So it's very, very interesting. This person is, and there's a lot of people who know who he is in Merthyr. And I think he's got a lot of questions to answer, Mark. I really do. And I mean, why they never done it and brought him in, I do not know for questioning. It's worrying.
Well, Michael, that's a fascinating story, the Merthyr 3, your update in relation to the new evidence you found, the conflict between the unleaded and leaded, and of course, the fact that you now believe you know the name of the killer and you will in due course name them. Well, let's move to the next case. The next case is Joe Fetter. This is a very, very sad story, as they all are. But this one is particularly sad. In 2016, Gemma Miller, mother of two children, was driving her car out of a service station when there was a collision. The collision was with another vehicle driven by Jamie Oaten, who was a police officer's son. She died as a result of the serious injuries she sustained in that crash. Oaten was charged and convicted at Cardiff Crown Court of participating in an impromptu race with another man, Joseph Fetter. Oaten pleaded guilty, and Fetter, who says he did not know Oaten at all, was found guilty at a second trial of joint enterprise. Fetter, in his interview, maintained his innocence. However, during those interviews, Fetter did not have an appropriate adult. Michael, let's take that story up from the very beginning. So this tragic accident happens. Oaten is found guilty in relation to the crash. Did the police have evidence that there was a second party involved at that time?
Well, I've had a look at the CCTV footage, and I find it very, very difficult to see where the race took place, because although Joe was speeding a little, there's no doubt about that. And Joe said, yeah, I was doing 50 in a 30 miles an hour zone or something like that. He wasn't doing 70 like the other gentleman was doing. And I had a look at the CCTV footage. Joe was nowhere near Jamie Oaten's car. By all accounts, they was, according to some of the witnesses who lied at that trial, they were bumper to bumper, they were side to side, and they were racing. But in the CCTV footage, it clearly shows that wasn't the case. Now, my investigations, and I wrote about it in the dossier, there's 5 witnesses who come forward saying they seen the race, and stuff like that. there's only one problem with some of these witnesses. They were in serious trouble with the police. They were all criminals, and they all had something to gain to give false evidence against Joe Fetter. That I do know, and that is very concerning because these witnesses, how can I put it? One of them went into the police called a taxi for this one witness, and he told the taxi driver that he was going to give evidence against Joe Fetter, and he was telling him things which made him believe that Joe Fetter was innocent. And we tried to call Brian as a witness, the taxi driver, to dispute what this man was saying. And the judge ordered that a statement be taken from the taxi driver, but from an independent police officer. Now, what happened then, it was the same police officers involved in the case who took the statement from Brian, telling him to leave stuff out of his statement, which they didn't want to hear, and he was frightened. And when he went back into court, then when the defense said, well, why have you taken the statement when you were told to get an independent? They said, we were short of staff. Now, there's stuff like that, which was said. Now, these witnesses, I don't want to mention their names at the moment because because there might be an appeal going to this, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, and I'm sure they're going to investigate it. But they were all in serious trouble with the police. 1 minute they were saying at the first trial that he was doing Lewis Hamilton speeds. Now, when you go down this road in Barry and have a look at the road, you'd be lucky if you could do 60. It's impossible. So you can't do Lewis Hamilton speeds. So these witnesses have clearly lied, in my view, and I've gone into a bit more detail in my book. I think I got the Innocence Project in Cardiff University involved. The only thing that Cardiff University are concerned about, really, now they agree that the witnesses, we can prove they all lied and the reasons why they lied, because they were in serious trouble. We've got all that there, which the jury didn't hear. That's the most important. But the stumbling block for the Innocence Project, as they feel, is because of the speed when they were doing reconstructions. There was a guy who come back after 3 months to look at the case, and he said there was blue splatterings on the wheels, like as if he was doing excessive speeds. When we asked for the car to be examined by the defense to see if that was indeed the case, the car went missing. So we couldn't do our own tests on it. So we've only got what the police officer have said. Well, surely that can't be right. If you're going to use the car as evidence against Joe, you've got to allow the defense to examine it as well as the police. And they've only let the one side use of it, and the car went missing.
Michael, how come Joe Fetter was even in the frame by the police in the first place?
Well, what happened was this young lady reckons she went on Facebook. Somebody told her that about Joe Fetter, and she went on Facebook and identified him on Facebook and said, "Oh yeah, that's Joe Fetter." And she rung up the police and said, "That's the guy who was at the scene." Now, Joe was behind this guy. There's no doubt about it. Not right up like they tried to make out. He was behind him because he had to take the car into the garage to get new tires on there. So he just happened to be passing the same way as Oldham was going. So, but an interesting thing, at the crash scene, there was a police officer, an off-duty police officer, who we want to speak to, because he said he never seen Joe Fetter behind Jamie Olton's car, touching, and speeding. He only seen the one car. And the police won't identify who this police officer is. We've got him on video. We know he can turn around and say, we've got his statement, and he said there was no race. That's very interesting, coming from a independent police officer who was there at the scene. So
did Fetter and Oton know each other?
They did not know each other. And this is the thing about the joint enterprise. In law, and you know the law probably better than I, to have a joint enterprise, it's got to be like a nod, wink, wink, or let's side by side, and stuff like that. There was nothing. They didn't even know each other. And, knowing Joe as I do, and knowing the situation, Joe got 5 years because he pleaded his innocence. Oton pleaded guilty. Why didn't the defense call Oton as a witness? Because he even said in his statements, and I've seen texts from Jamie Oton, that Joe Fetter, he did not know. There was no race. And then most importantly, when Jamie Houghton pleaded guilty at the trial, Ellery Reese, the judge, turned around and said she accepted that there was no impromptu race. It was only after Joe's case, when the second trial began, that the judge said, well, in my view, I think there was an impromptu race, and basically threw out what the other judge had said previously. Well, surely that's a material irregularity. Surely there's something not right there.
So
how can you? Yeah.
Sorry, Michael. So the suggestion is, and very interesting, people following, we've got Joe's father, Stephen Fetter, who has joined us and is putting some statements and some questions out there. So, Stephen, thank you very much for joining us. Do keep joining us and participating. Michael, so the issue is with the case is that Houghton accepts that he was there and accepts that he had a collision with the car.
Yes.
But the police's position is an impromptu race took place, i.e. Houghton and Fetter didn't know each other, but they had a race. And as a result of that race, Houghton then collided with the other vehicle. And if Fetter hadn't have been there, that race wouldn't have taken place. Is that, in brief, their case?
That's in a nutshell what they're saying. Yes, that's in a nutshell. But there was no evidence there was a race. This is the thing we're getting at. The speeds they were saying Joe was doing, like touching his bumper, there was no evidence of this. But the witnesses were going in the box saying, well, I saw it. They were bumper to bumper. But the CCTV footage clearly shows that that was not a case. Joe was about 4 or 5 seconds behind the car. Now, can you imagine, you're driving down the road, or I'm driving down the road, and you're behind me, and I'm doing 70 and you might be doing 50, and that woman pulls out in front of me. Does it mean you're responsible because you're behind me? Because I've smashed into the car.
And how many witnesses came forward, and how were they in a position to give the evidence? Were they in other cars? Were they on foot? What was their position?
Some said they seen it from the road. One of them said they were in the car and they seen Joe. They also alleged that Joe went partying on a night in question after he left the scene, but he didn't leave the scene. On the CCTV footage, he tried to assist. He tried to see if there was anything he could do, but obviously the services were already there. People were already there. Then Joe went home. But according to the judge at the Court of Appeal, if Joe hadn't have left the scene and gone partying, it would have been a different ball game. Well, I don't know where the judge got that from, but there's no doubt about it. Joe did not go partying that night. He did not go partying. He went home. He phoned his father. I remember him. I remember, speaking to Steve. He phoned his father, and there was no. He didn't run away like they said he did, and the papers picked up on it terribly. And I know the police officer. I'm not going to mention him today, but I have mentioned him in my book. He bullied Joe in the interviews, and I don't know whether you know that Joe saved a couple of people's lives before where there was an accident which happened, and he was praised, and they tried to bring that up and saying, "Well, you killed again, Joe, haven't you?" and things like this. And I mean, Joe was praised by the coroner for trying to save these lads' lives. But they tried to make out that Joe was involved in that, and he wasn't, and made a big thing about it. So it was like they tried to do evidence of similar fact, if you like, against him, when there was nothing there at all to suggest.
One of the things you talk about, Michael, is that Joe didn't have an appropriate adult. Did he have special needs? Was there a requirement for that?
Well, he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder because of what he's seen with a crash before. When he went to help these people, and I think two or three of them died, and Joe was trying to pull him out with the car. So obviously he was traumatized by that. Right. They were told that he was traumatized. He was he's been diagnosed with PTSD. The police officer knew, but still overrid. The only time Joe had an appropriate adult was when his mother was there when they charged him. So why give him an appropriate adult when they charged him and not beforehand?
So does Houghton accept? And I know Stephen's put in there that Houghton was convicted of dangerous driving. But does Houghton accept that there was a race taking place?
No, he doesn't. He said there was no race taking place.
So he says there was no race. So he says there's no race. The CCTV does not show any evidence that there was a race taking place. The only evidence they've got is these witnesses who say that they were bumper to bumper. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
And how far does the CCTV take you back? Does it just do moment of impact at the service station, or does it take you back some distance?
It takes you back some distance. You can see quite a lot.
How far can you follow that CCTV for to point of
Well,
impact?
I think Steve will be able to answer that better than what I can. I'm not sure. I know right up to the accident, I think you can see most of it. Do you know what I mean? And maybe not all of it, but I do know you cannot do the speed which the police alleges Joe did on that stretch of road.
Is it on the main road into Barry?
I think it is, yes.
Right.
Steve would be able to answer that
quite
question
well.
for
So
you.
it's a single passing traffic, isn't it, on that road?
That's
with
right.
Houses,
That's
with
right.
houses on both sides.
Yeah, it's with the garages. Yes, there's a garage there as well. Yeah, that's where it happened. Yeah, I must say this as well for the victim's family. I know this is painful for them hearing about Joe's case, but Joe did not cause the accident. And I have to stick up for Joe as well as I got to stick up for the victim's family. It must be awful for them, and I spared a thought for them too, because there's two sets of victims here.
Yeah.
As I said, there was the primary victim and a secondary victim. Joe had no criminal record as well. I must say that he wasn't one for getting into trouble and doing impromptu races. I know he was a youngster and all that, but you can't tarnish all youngsters with the same brush.
No, I mean, I think it came up on our last conversation, but if it didn't, I'll make the point again. I have a real issues with joint enterprise. I think joint enterprise is one of the most dangerous pieces of legislation that is used inappropriately and as a capture for kind of dragging other people in. I can see why it exists, because there are people out there that rightly should be caught by joint enterprise. But for so many times, that joint enterprise piece of legislation has been used incorrectly. And I think in jail, there are far too many people who are in there for joint enterprise where the evidence doesn't support. In fact, it's probably, and I can't tell this statistically, but my research in terms of the cases that I've covered would tell me that there are far too many people in jail for joint enterprise who should not be, compared to probably any other conviction.
Well, I know a couple of joint enterprise cases. I'm looking at one. I was looking one back last year where there was a mistaken identity on the car in the Andrew Feather case. This is a case where people were seriously injured, and Andrew's car was also being seen in the vicinity. But when you look at the CCTV footage, it wasn't his car, but yet he still got found guilty because it looked like his car. And, because he knew the people who'd done the crime, because they all live in the same area, that's how he got convicted, basically because he knew him and he spoke to him before. I mean, there was no direct evidence he was involved in the crime, no evidence that he was there. And I don't know, this joint enterprise, I think, like you said, it's wrong. It's wrong. I think you've got to go on evidence rather than dragging everybody in and saying, well, if you don't say who done it, you're all going down, which is what seems to be the case, in a lot of these cases with the youngsters.
So, Michael, tell me what the next steps are for Joe Fetter and his family.
Well, we're going to approach the CCRC now with a view to getting them to reopen the case. There's a bit of work which still needs to be done, which me and Steve are trying to sort out with experts and stuff like that. I think the ID evidence, where one of the witnesses identified Joe from Facebook, I think that is an abuse of procedures as well, because there's strict guidelines on how you identify. We've noticed stuff like that. We found out more evidence against some of the witnesses who were in serious trouble with the police and some of the crimes they were actually convicted of. And the fact that they got lesser sentences for giving evidence against Joe, I think we need to make that aware to the CCRC.
So they actually got reduced. There are witnesses who got reduced.
Yeah,
giving
absolutely.
Evidence.
They were in serious trouble. Yeah, one of them was a
great.
serious drug dealer, and he's still on the streets now. And I mean, he shouldn't be on the street. What he got charged?
Well, if you can prove that they got a reduced sentence as a result of giving evidence, that is a major problem for the Crown.
Absolutely, and this is what we're doing. We're undermining them, but we've got to go to the Criminal Cases Review Commission now. I don't think we've got any choice now to go through the CCRC. We don't know how long that's going to take, but that's our next step. We did do a demonstration the other day outside Cardiff Crown Court for all the victims of miscarriages, including Joe Fetter's case, because there seems to be a big problem in Wales, as I explained to you last time, that there's been numerous cases of injustices and nobody's been brought to book in each and every case. And in Joe's case, I was told that the evidence they used in Joe's case would not happen again. And this come from a very senior officer when I went to see him in 2002, and yet they're still convicting people on that same evidence. It's very, very worrying.
Well, Michael, I wish Joe and his family well. Of course, if Joe is not responsible in any way, he should not be in jail. And if you have the evidence to support that, then that evidence needs to be presented correctly and appropriately to the appropriate authorities in order for him to be released. And I wish you well, and I wish Joe well, as I say, if he's innocent, and particularly the family. You know, it's not just the impact of those people that have died, but also the impact of those people who are in jail. And Stephen has very kindly joined us today and given his view. I wish you well, Stephen, and the rest of your family, because it is unimaginable being in a position where your loved one is in jail. And of course, as you maintain, innocent. If he is innocent, then he shouldn't be in jail. So I wish you all well. Let's move on now to our last case. This is a case that has attracted considerable media attention. It's had programs made of it, and in fact, so much so that I have received quite a lot of people who have asked me if I would take up the case and look at it. Up until now, I haven't been able to. I just literally haven't had the time. But let's see what you think in relation to this case. This relates to Luke Mitchell. Luke Mitchell was sentenced to 20 years in prison in 2005 after he was found guilty of the brutal murder of Jodie Jones, 14 years old, his girlfriend. Her body was found stripped, stabbed, and almost decapitated near her home in Midlothian, Scotland. She had defense wounds on her arm, so clearly fought the attacker. At trial, it was said that Mitchell had at trial it was said that Mitchell had guilty knowledge, and that is because he found the body. The prosecution said that he had demonstrated already knowledge of where she was, and therefore, as a result of that, he must have been the killer. There was a damning piece of evidence, though, by Mitchell's brother. Mitchell's brother at trial testified that on the day he had been viewing pornography at the house and said that if his brother had been there, there's no way he would have been watching pornography, and therefore he has to draw the conclusion that Mitchell was not in the home that afternoon. Luke Mitchell has always maintained his innocence. He has had a number of appeals to overturn his conviction, and they've all been rejected, with the appeal court previously concluding that there had not been a miscarriage of justice. It is a very, very interesting case. Two 14-year-olds, one accused of murdering the other, his girlfriend. And the brutality of the crime, again, shocking, almost decapitating the victim to a degree that whoever the killer is has serious, serious problems. Luke Mitchell was jailed for that murder, but is he responsible? Many of you think not, and Michael is one of those. Michael, why is Luke Mitchell not guilty of this murder?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I contacted the leading expert to do with this particular case, which is Dr. Sandra Lean, who wrote a book called Innocence Betrayed. And I read that book cover to cover, and it's clear there was evidence there at the scene which pointed to other suspects. And I'm talking about DNA now. I mean, there was no DNA of Luke Mitchell's at the crime scene. I find that very disturbing when you consider the ferocious of the attack. We've got experts to have a look at it, and they've said anyone within a certain radius of Jodie's body would have had DNA on them. Now, we can establish that Luke did not change his clothes. He had the same clothes on. He had dirt under his fingernails and stuff like that, which come out. So if there was anything, they would have found it. But yet they found not one iota of DNA leading to Luke. However, they have found evidence leading to other suspects. There was a condom found at the scene, a used condom. There was 2 people there on motorbikes who were there as well. They are definitely somebody that needs to be looked at. There's also a TV documentary which was made, which I've watched, and 2 former detectives have investigated this case from start to finish and have come to the conclusion Luke Mitchell is innocent because of the other suspects which are there and haven't been looked at. Now, there's DNA evidence which hasn't been tested as well. We know that there's a lot haven't been tested, but there's no DNA evidence, and it's not right to say that Luke found the body. That's not fair. I think that's unfair. What Luke did, he took his dog out with him to go and look for Jodie and joined the party, which I think is fair, fair comment. I would have done the same myself. And the dog found the body, and then obviously the dog led Luke to the body, if you know what I mean. So it wasn't a case of Luke took him to the body like they're saying, per se. It was the dog which sniffed Jodie out. So I think there's a bit of a difference there than saying that he found the body. It was the dog which led him down that path because he wanted to know where Jodie was. He was concerned. It was his girlfriend. And I am convinced miscarriages of justice have definitely happened here. And so much so that on the 5th of August, we are having a big demonstration in Glasgow Square in Glasgow. And we're going to protest at the CCRC. We want them to reopen the case. We believe there's enough evidence to suggest it was somebody else who done the crime. The forensics do definitely point to other people. There's no doubt about it. Like in the case which have come to light yesterday. I don't know whether you're aware that a man has spent 17 years in prison for something he hadn't done. And again, there was DNA evidence there in 2006. The Criminal Cases Review Commission rejected his case twice before they sent it back and done the DNA testing on that evidence. So that's a serious failing. And I think the same has happened here with Luke's case, where the CCRC are not looking at the samples which need to be tested. Now, if you're an ex-police officer, if you come across samples, the first thing a police officer would do is, right then, we'll take these away for testing and find out whose they are, because they could lead to the real killer. Why haven't this been done? It's very, very disturbing. I really find that concerning.
Michael, let's go back to the beginning. What convicted Luke Mitchell?
The media. I think the media played a significant part. What I do know, and after reading the book and doing my own research and speaking to Dr. Sandra Lean, is they vilified this young man.
But I accept that. But let's turn the coin the other way. What is it that ultimately convicted him? I accept that you say it's a miscarriage of justice, but what is it that convicted him?
Because the jury were told that Luke found the body, and I think that they misinterpreted that he didn't just find the body; it was the dog which led him to the body. But the prosecution said, no, Luke found the body, so therefore he must be guilty.
Of course, the problem is you can't ask the dog that question, can you?
Well, that I accept that. I know what you're saying there. But what I'm saying is, when there's DNA evidence which points to other suspects who, they got serious questions to answer.
So let's look at that. Let's look at that. So the DNA, and this was a brutal attack. So what is being said is that whilst there was DNA on Luke, because there was a connection between the two of them, what is being said is that there was no blood, there was no transfer of any of that. Because of the nature of the violence and the attack, the evidence is that, well, if there had been, and it had been Luke, he would have had transfer blood on his clothing. Is that the point being made?
That is the point being made, exactly. Okay. I noticed Dr. Sandra Lean's just joined us, actually, so that's quite helpful as well, because she is the leading expert on it.
So brilliant. So those people that are watching, Dr. Sandra Lee, do follow her comments at the very bottom, and we'll draw them out. as we go along. So, so what Dr. Sandra Lean is saying there, the rest of the search party changed their stories. They initially agreed at trial that the dog alerted, then said at the trial the dog did nothing, and Luke went straight to the body. What is the reason that the Crown say that Luke killed her?
Well, this is what I don't understand. They basically demonized Luke, saying he was into like Nevada or something like that, something different from pop, and he, his demeanor is different to most people, like a goth. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. I mean, Sandra would be able to explain a bit better than I on that. And because, like, I don't know if you remember the case of Colin Stagg, because he had a different lifestyle to most people, he ended up getting wrongly accused as well. And I think this is a classic case with Luke as well, where, he doesn't fit in with the norm, and therefore then he must have done it because he was into a different kind of music to what everybody else was. So therefore, he was. They said he was like the devil. They called him everything in the newspapers. He was into the devil worshipping and all. And of course, it's untrue. He wasn't into stuff like that. But once you throw enough mud, it does sadly stick. And they've got a wrong perception of who Luke really is. And I think that's very worrying. A lot of innuendo and if buts and maybes again convicted Luke as well. There's no doubt about it. And obviously, because he found the body according to the prosecution in the way they said, I think that's what it was. But when you have a look at the evidence against Luke now, there is no direct evidence that he killed his girlfriend. But there is direct evidence to say there was other people there who could have done it. And why are they looking at it? Very worrying.
There was also this very strange link that the Crown made to a case which became known as the Black Dahlia case. This was Elizabeth Short, who was murdered in 1947. And there were some carvings on a tree. And they made a link between that case and the murder of Jodie Jones. Why?
Well, that's what I'd like to. I don't understand that at all. Maybe Sandra Lynn can help us out here. I think she's just made a comment now. I don't get that how they could make that link. When you think about it, in 1947, Luke wasn't even born, so how would he know about the case?
So that's just a kind of an interesting element that they brought in there, but without any supporting evidence to say that this was a mirror case. I mean, was there any suggestion that he'd researched that case and been looking at that case?
Well, I don't think there was any evidence at all to suggest that. That's what I don't understand. And where they got this angle from is very surprising to most of us. I don't know how they come to that conclusion. But when they're supposed to go on evidence of what Luke was supposed to have done, and if you look at it, there was no evidence at the trial. What evidence was there?
There's an interesting point there from
yeah.
Dr. Sandra Lean has said that they said he was influenced by Marilyn Manson's coverage of the Black Dahlia murder. There was zero evidence of this ever produced. So what we've got a situation where Luke Mitchell is found guilty on the basis that the dog alerted, although that was perhaps transmitted and interpreted as Luke Mitchell himself found her body, but also circumstantial evidence that they felt was relevant, which was both the Black Dahlia case and also the evidence from his brother, which in itself probably destroyed his alibi that he was at home on that day. Did Luke Mitchell have any other alibis that could put him away from that location on that day?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I'm still in the process of investigating and discussing things with Dr. Sandra Lynn. She'd probably be able to answer that question for you. I think she just has.
So, Dr. Sandra Lean, it's very helpful having you on board. Thank you very much. There's no evidence of any computers. They took them all and searched them. So, Luke Mitchell maintains his innocence. What about Jodie Jones's family? What do they think?
I don't know. I've never spoken to Jodie Jones' family, so I wouldn't be able to tell you that. Maybe Sandra Lean would be able to, Dr. Sandra Lean would be able to tell you a bit more about it. But I do know one thing. Luke Mitchell did do a lie detector test, and so did his mother, because his mother was brought into this, where they tried to get it done for perjury, saying that she gave a false alibi to Luke. They both passed it with flying colours. I think we must mention that. And although it's not admissible in law per se, it does give a good indication that they were telling the truth.
I mean, for Luke Mitchell to have committed this crime, brutal, barbaric crime, aged 14, yet there was nothing in his past. There'd been no violence. There'd been no other attacks of any. This is literally an isolated incident, is it?
Well, this is it. As far as I'm aware, Luke has never been into trouble before, and certainly nothing like this at all. So where did this come from? Whoever done this was evil and wicked? There's no doubt about it, and had serious issues. Luke didn't have serious issues. So I really don't understand it at all. How just because he's the boyfriend, and I understand the police go for the boyfriend or the husband if they're wives or girlfriends, but I think this is a different case altogether. I mean, there's evidence there that somebody done this crime. Please test the evidence. This is all I got to say to the CCRC. They need to do it, Mark. It's a paramount importance.
The case has been to the Court of Appeal previously. What evidence was argued at that point and rejected?
Well, I wasn't at the Court of Appeal then. I can't answer that question, unfortunately, but I know Dr. Sandra Lean can. I'm just getting familiarised with most of the case, and I've seen the forensic, which have swayed me as to why I'm saying I think Luke is innocent. Well, I know he's innocent, in my view. But I think Dr. Sandra Lean will be able to say what evidence was there. But I just think they've got to be brave enough to send this case back to the Court of Appeal once they've carried out the further testing on the DNA evidence.
So let's talk about that DNA evidence. So we know there was definitely DNA evidence between Luke and Jodie, and of course there would be. They were in a relationship.
Yeah.
But what is the evidence that links to somebody else? I don't want you to name who the other individuals are, but let's just narrow in on that a bit. You're saying to me there was a condom, a used condom there. Is that DNA in that condom, has that now been tested, and is that linked to either a suspect or to Jodie?
Well, it hasn't been tested as far as we're aware. This is the problem. This is what we're trying to get done. We're trying to get the testing done. There was also stuff on Jodie's bra with DNA on it, which pointed to another suspect. This is why I'm saying it wasn't Luke. So if that person's DNA is on the body, that I would say more likely than not, they got to be number one suspect.
So how many other DNA profiles were found on or near Jodie's body?
Well, I know there was a couple. I don't know exactly, but I know there was a couple, and it's cause for concern, real cause for concern,
right? Because
they should, there was something on her other clothing, from what I can gather as well, which belonged to the same person who I mentioned. So
why did the defense, because they would have had disclosure of that, why did the defense not argue for the examination of the DNA that doesn't match their client, i.e. Luke Mitchell, but must match somebody else?
Very good point. Why didn't they? Did they? And if they did, why didn't they pursue it further? There's a lot of unanswered questions in this case, most definitely. But, the DNA evidence is going to be the thing which solves this, like most of the miscarriages of justice cases. And I feel there lies the answer. It's there. Why haven't the CCRC, the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, carried out those investigations on the DNA which is there, which hasn't been tested? I mean, it could prove Luke is innocent. So why aren't they doing their job? I'm really concerned about that. That really bothers me.
Well, it sounds like a fascinating case, as are all three of those cases, and certainly something that needs to be pursued. Of course, the problem is when the police have made their decision and it's been through a trial, it is very, very difficult to get cases overturned. We know how difficult that is because of the route that you have to take. You obviously have to go through the Court of Appeal process, and exhausting that, your only then route is the criminal case review. And the problem with the criminal case review is that they are not only massively understaffed and have too much work, there are questions in terms of their own ability and independence in respect of that. And one of the greatest problems of always is getting a judge to criticize another judge, to overturn a judge's decision, because judges tend to all come from the same type of background. They all know each other, and it's very difficult for one to criticize another. So when a decision's been made, to get that case to appeal and subsequently overturned is a very difficult thing to do. Before I move, Michael, to the very last case that we're going to talk about, your work is in helping people to get their justice when they claim there is a wrongful conviction. And it is very hard to get that. But there has been success. In the last 24 hours, there is a significant case that you have followed and you have done some work on, where actually an individual has finally won. Tell us about that.
Well, there was a man who got released yesterday. It was a CCRC referral. His name's, I'll just put my glasses on a second because I've got his name written down here. I can't pronounce his last name. It's Andrew Malkinson, has done 17 years for a crime he didn't do. Now, it was a rape case. It was, horrendous cases like they all are, as we identified. But the significant thing is the CCRC looked at this case twice before. The DNA evidence has always been there. And I think they failed this man. They looked at it in 2006. And yet, if they would have done that DNA testing then this man wouldn't have spent as much time as what he did. So there should be an inquiry set up to look at the CCRC, why they failed him. And I'm saying, in the same token as the Luke Mitchell case, test the DNA evidence. What have you got to hide? It's the same situation. If they test that DNA evidence and it proves Luke Mitchell is innocent, they've kept him in prison all this time knowing that. Like, that cannot be right. And this case illustrates how the CCRC sometimes get it wrong. Maybe not, they haven't got the funds, as you say, to investigate. But then they've got to be vocal and say they haven't got the money to investigate, not saying we're not referring the case and not give no explanation for it. So, I feel for this gentleman. I give an interview before I come on here for Radio 4 today. And this man is going to have serious psychological problems adjusting to the outside world. And I've talked about that and the situation. Miscarriages are still happening today. Let's make no mistake about that. They're not a thing of the past, and they're not rare as what the establishment make out they are. Since the Guildford story broke in 1989, the Innocence Project, when I was working for Bristol University, 85,000 successful appeals were had at the Court of Appeal. Most of these were mundane cases, I grant you, and people don't know of them. But nevertheless, that is a lot of people. So the notion that miscarriages of justices are a rarity is not the case at all.
No, absolutely, and they're not at all, are they? Very sad, very sad. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time, as ever. It's fascinating talking to you, and I'm no doubt we'll talk again. So those are three cases that we've covered. The Merthyr Three, where 3 people were convicted in relation to a horrific arson, which killed 3 people, a mother and 2 daughters. We then talked about the case of Joe Fetter. Joe Fetter convicted on a joint enterprise, where the case against him was that he was in an impromptu race with another individual who himself at court said there was no impromptu race. And the evidence against Joe Fetter, not supported by CCTV, but supported by witness evidence. And there is now a question mark over whether or not that witness evidence stands up to scrutiny. And then our last case, Luke Mitchell. Luke Mitchell's case over the 3 has received the largest amount of publicity. It's had a program made about it, and I'm often asked to investigate it. This is 14-year-old Luke Mitchell, who was convicted of the brutal and barbaric murder of his girlfriend, Jodie Jones, and is subsequently in jail, maintaining his innocence. And he has a huge following who say that he is innocent. And of course, there are many people out there who say he is guilty, none more so than Jodie Jones's family, who believe that he is the killer. Well, they have a long time ahead of them to see whether or not they will get acquitted of the cases and the charges that they are in jail for. The sad thing is that for each and every one of those, there are victims. There are victims, the people who died, the Merthyr mother and 2 children, Joe's Fetter's victim in the car crash, in terms of the lady that was subsequently received the fatal injuries as a result of Oton crashing into her, and of course Jodie Jones, who died brutally at the hands of a killer. The state say Luke Mitchell. Luke Mitchell says it wasn't him. But of course there is also the family. We were joined today by Joe's father, Stephen, who shared his thoughts in relation to this case. And of course, they have to suffer the sadness of losing a loved one. And of course, their view is their loved one was not responsible. I wish Michael and all of those parties, whether you are a victim in relation to being a victim of crime, or you are a victim by the very nature that your loved one is in jail and of course maintains their innocence. Michael, do keep us updated in relation to all of those 3 cases. And if you have any particular cases you want us to follow, do drop us a line. Once again, thank you very much. And I wish everybody well. And my thoughts, particularly at this moment in time, remain with Amber Connor. Amber Connor, who was killed by her brother. And of course, we've talked about that case. The very person that should and could have kept us safe. Thank you. Look after yourself and take care.